This ever feeling of two-ness. And now it's not even two-ness, it's multitude-ness. You know, I have students at Allen University in my Intro to Lit Honors class, and we talk about you can't really examine literature until you understand the culture by which people have established this worldview. So, if many of you have gone to an ophthalmologist before or an optometrist before, you sit behind the instrument that the ophthalmologist says, you know, 1 or 2, A or B, constantly shifting the lens. And shifting the lens becomes important because when you understand culture and you understand the agendas that exist in different cultures, you also begin to understand what perspective, what worldview people begin to speak from, behave from, write literature from, research from. And you then understand their positionality, sometimes even in contrast to that of which is your own. And so this idea of promoting a context of multiculturalism, multiracial identity begins to create this context of being fragmented. I'm going to just run through a couple points real quick. In 1965, the United States had begun to define what HBCUs could be in terms of their establishment had to be before 1964. It created the first social contract between historically disenfranchised people and the government. But, you know, those contracts are tricky. Remember, Indians got blankets. They also got blankets with smallpox. Tuskegee experiment also resulted in the sickness and illness of populations of black people. So what we've seen as a behavioral pattern is that in this exchange of this for that, we always end up on the bad end of the stick. Look at modern medicine. You know, you take a pill for a headache and it's likely gonna also make you wanna commit suicide. So, you know, in this Eurocentric context of sharing and exchanging things, there's always this sort of ill will that accompanies what is promoted as a good gesture. So the South started to sort of feed into this fear of HBCUs. It left Afrocentricity on the outskirts. The benevolence between white organizations was to be able to say we want freed slaves to be able to have a context of education, but the education had to be framed in a Eurocentric value system, a Eurocentric religion. So then we get to the present and we're looking at Du Bois again, and it still hasn't changed. This idea that even here at Howard University, when I was a student here, we had to address many undergraduates that said that they felt like Ebonics was beneath them, that it was a way of black speech that articulated a lack of intelligence when in fact all cultures have Ebonics. So, you know, this idea of classism because of where you are, this elitism starts to promote itself in disorientation or disanchoring from Afrocentricity into a location that is otherwise Eurocentric, and we have to stay vigilant to keep each other on point in those cases. Peter Adler suggests that multi-phrenic conceptualization is one that suggests it transcends national identity. Without a context of national identity oriented in your origins, you are diffused, you have a diffused identity, it is misconfigured, you have no loyalties to any particular agenda, and so one day you're Eurocentric, the next day you're Afrocentric, another day you're Asia-centric, and it's a fragmented identity. And so what it means to be African-centered is to be aware that you are purposefully placing yourself at the center of things that are African in its culture and in its relevance to you and your existence. And then last but not least, the African-centeredness versus Afrocentricity is a matter of an agenda. You know, to be African-centered is to simply express consciousness that is African-centered, but it does not express an awareness of socio-political agenda. And socio-political agenda is actually what fuels the framework of which talks about this context of our liberation or oppression. And to not be aware of the socio-political agenda of anyone or any system is to not fully be aware of your own sense of agency and what it is that you promote as a context for your own cultural identity. That's it. Location. However, observe people's behaviors. Like, so when you start to fundamentally understand what the function and rhetoric of Eurocentric ideology and values looks like, sounds like, you can very easily start to see the behaviors and what people say and what people do. So it starts to eliminate your clash with folks, because you start to be able to very quickly have a spirit of discernment that allows you to know who you are about to engage with and what type of conversation is appropriate and sometimes necessary to protect your own vested interests. Okay.
Okay, this is a very wonderful panel. I didn't get to listen to all of you, but I think it was a great presentation. I have a quick question for Dr. Selassie. I think you have done a very wonderful job about talking about the HBCUs. I was talking to Dr. Ali this morning, and I said, I gave two examples. You know, one of those is the president of a HBCU who said, we don't need Africana studies, we don't need black studies, because we're already black. That was his reason for giving it. Okay? And I said, really? And then I also am aware that Howard has rebranded itself and says we are no longer a HBCU, we are a multicultural whatever. And I said, why do we always have to move from our identity? What is wrong with being, on what premise was this institution created, or these institutions created? Why do we always have to move away from our identity? So I don't know how many HBCUs you looked at, but where would you say that HBCUs are in the context of the Afrocentric idea you have just discussed?
So the issue becomes that in a study like this, talking about it on the outskirts is difficult, because there's no one way. So, you know, it's like, do you look at the president's consciousness? Do you look at the provost's consciousness? Do you look at the board's consciousness? Or do you look at all of those consciousness as a collective way of shaping the identity of a historically black university? And at the end of the day, what it really boils down to is this idea that Afrocentricity can be on the outskirts, because what it will do, like, so Afrocentricity in essence is so powerful that even on the outskirts, we still manage to have conferences like this, where we come together to have these powerful conversations. However, what it also means is that the bricks and mortars, we have to learn how to let go. And simply say, if coming to Howard University is simply to get an education, then you have to treat Howard University like you would treat any other regular PWI, if that's what Howard University wants to become, and shifting from its orientation as a black mecca. That the legacy is done, dead, and over with. And that becomes a hard thing for people to let go of. But understand that there's no point in sacrificing good old scholarships that you can get at a predominantly white institution because you're black to be able to come to Howard University and have to pay full on out of pocket, only to be told that you're not going to get a black education and be able to be around people that help foster a black identity. Now I can say that now that I'm graduated and I'm not working at Howard University. You know, but while you're here, it becomes imperative that you find spaces. Two or more creates a space for you to be able to have an African-centered consciousness that is shared. So it means that we have to start rethinking how we think about this context of knowledge and information building. Formal knowledge by virtue of a degree is important. I mean, even folks are starting to realize that that's a ripoff. I mean, I got a PhD, and as a professor, I make like, you know, pennies to peanuts. But understand that because that paper yields a certain level of credibility to function in the world, it still is about a socio-political agenda that you have to play the game to be a part of. In order to be at the table, you gotta play the game. And so you've gotta make strategic moves that make sense for you without compromising your own cultural location. So in that context, there really is no way of being able to escape the fact that it's not by accident that board members who have ascended to a certain class, which, you know, the class of privilege is oftentimes associated with Eurocentrism and Eurocentric values, it's no surprise that they select presidents, provosts to run historically black universities and augment and alter the consciousness of that university. So it's okay if we're on the outskirts, because it's in those small spaces, it's in these small rooms that many of you will go forward as agents to do great work, to be PhDs, to find your own voice and function in communities. And for those who are not able to enter into the hallowed halls of academia, return home to have very basic coffee table conversations about what this means in a very practical lived experience. So despite the fact that these HBCUs now are becoming more Eurocentric, you know, we still find ourselves resolve in what we contextualize as our sense of agency to still move forward and have prolific conversations. You do not have to have a PhD to engage in empirical research and produce publications. You know, when you greet me, yes, I am a PhD, yes, I am doctor, yes, it is a title that I deserve, but before that, I am brother to blackface, right? So that is what matters. So we have another section of presenters coming in.
Yeah, just remind what time
That will, it's 12:26.
Yeah.
That will resume at
is
1:30.
Yeah.
So there's another section.
Just everywhere. Just wanna remind.
Oh, okay. So that all of the other presentations are going to reoccur at about 1:30?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
And okay. Go ahead.
Greetings to everyone. I'm Pablo Shamik, as you know. These sessions